Hello, hello, hello. It's good to see you all. I am Dr. Julie Allig of JLA Analytics, also known as the Data Diva, and here for my weekly Friday live stream where we're going to talk about algorithmic bias. So, first, I want to say welcome. Welcome to everyone. If you're just joining us today, if you've joined me before, welcome back. And for those of you watching this on replay, it's good to see you again. Quick reminder that you can find me here on LinkedIn, doing a LinkedIn Live on Friday afternoons, and also over on my YouTube channel. My handle over there is at NH Data Diva, and I will have more of those details and everything in the comments below after this. So it is here in Manchester, New Hampshire. It is a beautiful late summer Friday afternoon. It's sunny. We don't have any of that monsoon rain or anything for once, thank goodness. So we're here today to talk about algorithmic bias. So what the heck is even algorithmic bias? And why would I pick something like this to talk about on this beautiful late summer Friday afternoon? Actually, here in the States, this is the Friday of a long holiday weekend. So a lot of people are probably thinking about getting away from their desk pretty soon. Algorithmic bias is not exactly the sort of thing that you think of when you think of, let's talk about data and how data is impacting me personally and how data is impacting our businesses, right? But this is something that is happening in the background. It's something that is very important. And it really has a lot of potential to do harm if it hasn't already. And there are a lot of examples documenting just how biased algorithms have been used in the past. I would say in the past decade, 15 years, something like that. So also, just giving you all a warning here that I'm going to try very hard not to go off on a rant, but this is something that really gets me fired up to talk about. Specifically, not so much, equations and being able to use equations to help predict and make decisions. That, you know me, I'm all about that and how helpful they can be in our businesses, but the uncritical use of them, no critical thinking put into how they're constructed, what kind of results for which people or groups of people these algorithms have, that will send me off on a rant. So just quick aside there. So if you have any comments, go ahead and put them down below. I would love to see what you've got to say. If you've got a question, put a Q in front of it just so that I know it's not a comment. And as I'm watching the comments here on my screen, I know that there's an actual question and I'll address it as soon as I can. And also, for those of you watching in real time, go ahead and drop in the comment, where are you from? Where are you watching from? I'm always interested to see that. So what got me started on this was, you might ask, I will be happy to tell you, this slide, and I'm pulling it up right now, that I read. Here we go. I'll make it into a slideshow for y'all so you can see it easier. There we go. So this is the slide that really started me thinking about this and really got me fired up recently. fired up. So there is a really good series on the Pulitzer Center's website. They've done a lot of work on AI and its implications, and having journalists from around the globe take a look at AI and how it's being used and what impact it's having. And one of the articles was about the way that the city of Rotterdam over in the Netherlands has been using AI as a way to detect welfare fraud. And now this slide that is from several years ago, when this was originally done, this algorithm, it was built by the consulting firm Accenture. You can see down here the attribution here. They did it several years ago, back in 2017. And so the city of Rotterdam asked them in and said, listen, we think we have a problem with welfare fraud. Specifically, we think that there are people who are applying and receiving health welfare benefits, which could be health welfare benefits that for whatever reason, they're not eligible. Can you help us by creating an algorithm that will predict whether or not a certain person is likely to propagate welfare fraud? There you go. So Accenture did that. That was their remit. That was what their client asked them for. And you see here on this slide that Accenture said basically what they were going to be doing was taking advanced analytics, adding machine learning to it, and coming up with unbiased citizen outcomes. And that's where my the rant part of me just went off, because there's bias in everything. There just is. And there's bias in machine learning, and there's bias in advanced analytics. And as responsible users of those, our purpose is to make sure that we minimize it, right? That we ferret out where it possibly is, and we get rid of it to the largest extent that we possibly can. So to say that they're going to be able to create something that gives you unbiased citizen outcomes, that right there, I was like, yeah, no, it's just not possible. And it's also, again, like I mentioned, it's important. It's incumbent upon us as people who use data, right? Analytics. It's incumbent upon us to use those analytics in an ethical way. So that got me going. And now, where did I go from there, though? What happened was I read through this a bit more through the case itself. And it turns out what the Pulitzer Center was able to do, and they did this in conjunction with Wired magazine, which is a magazine that covers technology industry just broadly. They were able to basically reverse engineer what these algorithms did. And basically they found that there were 315 variables that went into this algorithm. And this algorithm, what it did is it basically, for all the people who had requested welfare benefits, it gave them a risk index, a risk score. And that's fine. Risk scores are used in lots of different ways. They can be very helpful. The problem is, what are the inputs into that risk score? And that's where, in this case, a lot of the bias comes in. And it's not necessarily something you would think of, right? Because, for example, and this is an example of a hypothetical person named Sarah. If you think about it, the way that they gathered the data about this Sarah in order to be able to put that data into the model, they were figuring her gender. So, gender female. So, it got coded in as male or female, female. How many children she had. She happened to have 2. And now this is where it starts to get kind of interesting. So, currently has partner. So again, a Boolean here, a yes, no, a false, true, false. So here, false. Financial difficulties, true. Okay, this is how she's getting scored. And these are the variables, right, that are going to be put together into this algorithm that will, in the end, spit out this risk score, right? Now we get down here to, let's take a look at this one, can deal with pressure, false. So that might make you sit back and think, wait a minute, what do you mean can deal with pressure? What does that mean? Well, it turns out what it means is caseworkers went through and had, their normal meetings with these people, I'm assuming face-to-face meetings with these people, and they would make notes, right? And so out of those notes, what came were, okay, did the case manager basically say anything in the notes about whether or not this person can deal with pressure well or not? And apparently for this hypothetical, the caseworker said something that led Sarah to be coded as, no, she really can't deal with pressure very well. So right there, you can already see just this subjectivity that's coming in. What exactly does it mean for Sarah to be able to deal with pressure? And how did the caseworker formulate that opinion or that idea? And how dependent is that on one caseworker's opinion of Sarah versus another potential caseworker's opinion? How would they have coded Sarah? And what the heck did Sarah say or do or recount in the course of that conversation with the caseworker that made the caseworker conclude, yeah, she can't deal with pressure? See, none of those things are in here. There is nothing, from what I understand in the documentation, to explain why the heck Sarah was coded with false, that she cannot deal with pressure. And yet that is something that's used in the equation that Accenture built to score Sarah on whether or not she was a high or a low risk of welfare fraud. So just because you can reduce some information to a true false doesn't necessarily mean that that information is objective, and doesn't mean that bias has not crept in. Because right here, what kind of response might Sarah have given to make the caseworker interpret that, yeah, she can't handle pressure? Same thing. This was something else. Comment on appearance. So again, within the caseworker's written notes, within the files, did the caseworker say something about Sarah's appearance or something? Comment on flexibility. Did the caseworker say anything about whether or not this person was flexible? And I'm interpreting here probably flexibility, if you're talking about people applying for welfare, probably something about, are they flexible about looking for jobs outside of whatever industry or trade that they are used to working in, right? So how flexible are they to going over to another industry or something? Um, and it got coded as a true. So again, it's all just because we can take these subjective opinions, these subjective points of view from a caseworker and translate them into something, into a Boolean expression, right? Basically, into a true false that we can use in computer programming, right? In Python or whatever, doesn't mean that they are without bias. This is extremely biased. And then, for example, what some of the other variables that went into this algorithm were the number of times the person has emailed the city. Well, what does that have to do with anything, right? Whether or not they play sports. Again, what does that have to do? I can think, if I put my social scientist hat on, I can think about why they might be going down that line of questioning. But again, as to what kind of impact that has on whether or not they will do welfare fraud. I mean, I don't know anything about showing a relationship or a causal relationship between playing soccer and fraudulent welfare in Rotterdam. One other thing to point out about how this sort of thing creeps in without you even realizing it sometimes is you can have some of these, and what they end up acting as is as a proxy for something else. So in this case, which I thought was very interesting, some of the other variables that were used, one in particular was whether or not the person spoke the Dutch language very well. And in fact, how it turned out, that ended up being a proxy for their ethnicity. And so basically, they were constructing an algorithm that, I'm going to assign the best of intentions here, was simply finding that people who did not have high levels of fluency in the Dutch language they were thinking, were somehow more likely to perpetrate welfare fraud. I'm not saying that, but in how things worked out, that's what was going on. So again, we don't see anything here necessarily in these very nice, kind of bland variables that got included, right? All of this programming. But within these, once you start unpacking, you see just how biased this is. And if this is happening in one place, you know it's happening in other places. And so one of the things I also wanted to point out is, it's also, unfortunately, the sort of thing that sometimes we just don't realize we're doing until we actually see it in action. And here, let's see if my slide will proceed. Yep. Oh, that one will be later. I want to share that later. I found this article out on the World Economic Forum through them. And this was written several months ago by a computer science professor who wrote about a facial recognition program he authored about 25 years ago. Turns out he was having some difficulty with the program recognizing a human being apart from the background where they were, right? Picking out the fact that, oh, that's a potted plant. Oh, that's a human being. And so had this idea, well, what I can do is I can tell the program to look for facial color, for skin, right? the color of your face. And this was a white male. And so in his mind, he thought, well, just, I'm using myself as an example, to kind of test my algorithms here. So make it my skin color. And it only hit him. And it worked. It worked. But it only hit him when his professor had him show this algorithm to a group of visiting executives. They were visiting from Japan. And so all of a sudden he realized, whoa, I made a mistake here. And I did not take into account that I was programming this just to be recognizing Caucasian faces. So that's another, sometimes this is why I would say it's one of the reasons it's such a good idea to run your ideas, especially these kind of algorithmic ideas, past other people. The more diverse people, the absolute better. And in something like this, in these cases, you got to be willing to be wrong. And you will be wrong. I've been wrong myself. And I give this computer science professor, I give him props for admitting it and for putting out a call to do better. So that's an example also. Now, it's all well and good to talk about welfare, to talk about facial recognition. Let's take another example so we can see exactly what this kind of means, right? This is from, again, several years ago. And it's like, how did Amazon get this so wrong? So in the field of recruiting also, and in the field of HR, there's a lot of software that goes through lots of different resumes very quickly, looking for certain keywords, right? Looking for clues. They're usually like keywords or something to see which out of this pile of resumes are the applicants who have the closest match to what we're actually looking for. So these are used a lot. They've especially grown in use, especially in HR, since 2008, 2009, 2010. Amazon's experience with this was, what they did is they created an algorithm that screened out all the women who applied for his jobs. How in the heck did it do that? Well, if you think about it, most of its engineers, which are the jobs it was hiring for, most of them were white and male, even more so male than just white. And so when they went to build their algorithm to try and find talent, right, their recruitment algorithm, they told the algorithm, and again, this is very logical. Okay, here are the employees at Amazon that are very successful. They get good performance feedback. They've been with Amazon for a number of years, these sorts of things. These are the ones. So what we want you to do is go out and find among this group of applicants other people who look like, who resemble the kinds of people who are successful at Amazon, right? So what did it go out and find? It found that the people who were successful were the men, right? And so it looked for the men. So anyone's resume that came in with like women as a word on it, right? Or women's, like having attended a women's college or a woman's this or that, they were screened out. Because again, what the algorithm did was it defined successful employee in a certain way, and anyone who didn't meet that got screened out, which, okay, it's very logical. That seems very logical. Seems like that would work well. The thing is, you got to take into account the fact that there has been discrimination, gender discrimination, that has already selected that pool of employees who have already been hired and have been successful. And so you're simply perpetuating that discrimination if that's how you are training your algorithms to proceed into the future. So when you hear people in this space talk about algorithms perpetuating inequalities, right? That's what they're talking about. The fact that, in the past, and we know this within the United States, within the rest of the countries in the world, there has been in the workplace gender discrimination. So if that's what we want to see in the future, then do what Amazon did. If you want to change that, then you gotta rejigger things. Otherwise, you will be perpetuating that discrimination. And then one more example from the workplace, again, that I wanted to talk about. This is from earlier this year. This is from the Washington Post. And here in the United States, especially at the turn of the year, we're in 2023 right now. So at the turn of the year, there was a lot of talk about the tech industry and the layoffs that were happening, right? Facebook had announced a lot. There were a lot of companies in the tech industry that were pulling back and either laying off or simply firing employees. And so the question arose, well, how did these companies figure out who to lay off? How do you do that? Well, one way is to, again, use algorithms. Use algorithms to figure out what skills are going to be the crucial ones for the company moving forward, right, in the next year or so, and what people among our employees have those skills. And so do a nice, kind of match, right? Match up. And the skills that aren't needed by the company that certain employees have, they'll be the ones that we let go because there's not that match. Okay, well, go back to the example of the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands and remember that risk score. It's also possible to calculate a risk score for your employees in the sense that, are they a risk of flight? And that's what this article was talking about. Are they more likely to leave? And so kind of the logic goes, if they're more likely to leave, then maybe the company shouldn't be investing in them anyway. And so they should be the first ones among the first tranche of employees to be laid off if we're going to be doing any layoffs or anything, right? But think about this. Think about, again, a company that has had a history of discrimination, be it racial, be it based on religion, be it based on gender, such that those employees, because of the discrimination, they don't hang around, they quit, right? So they leave. And so unless you tell the algorithm that, then it's very likely that those are the kinds of employees that will be precisely the ones the algorithm picks up and flags as a higher flight risk than the others. So again, another example of discrimination in the past, bias in the past being drawn forward into the current and into the future. So again, propagating that bias, that discrimination. So those were some of the examples I wanted to share with you all. Let me do this. There we go. So, we could go on and on and on talking about algorithms and algorithmic bias, and I'll save some of those for some live streams that I'll be having in the coming weeks and months. But here, I wanted to kind of set a level playing field, set a foundation for understanding exactly why this is something that sets Julie off on a rant sometimes, and why I think that they're so dangerous, and why I think it's so important to talk about ethics every single time we talk about the technical details of creating these algorithms, these models, because without knowing it, we're simply propagating discrimination and bias that we already have or that are already in society or in organizations. One of my colleagues talks about bias with a tagline, have a brain, you've got bias, in the sense that we're all biased, no matter in small ways or in large ways. And the important thing is for us to recognize that we all are, simply because we're human. But that doesn't have to be deterministic. That doesn't have to mean that's the only way we're going to see the world and the only way that we're going to produce things like complex models that are going to predict things in the world. Instead, I think you might think, okay, she's going to say, let's trash these algorithms. Let's not use them anywhere. And I would say, absolutely not. They are much too helpful. They are so powerful. What I would say is you need to have these algorithms with an equal amount of ethics alongside of them, and ethics about who's being left out, who's being unfairly seen, how was this data collected. Again, these are the boring questions that no one wants to talk about when we're talking about data analysis. We want to get to the good stuff, right? We want to get to see where where we've got the statistically significant correlations and that sort of thing. Of course, that's the fun thing. But the pre-work that it's incumbent upon us to do is think about, how am I inadvertently, innocently allowing bias into my output here, trying to poke holes into what could be being inadvertently left out of the story, left out of your model, left out of your algorithm. Who doesn't this work for? Whose story does this skew unfairly, right? And I think that's where I would leave us today with algorithmic bias, is that it's there. It simply is. It's a remnant of how the data that we use has been collected. It's a remnant of several other things that we'll get into in future live streams. But it's so powerful. We need to morally use it. We need to have some ethics around using it. We need to be responsible. And I would say the first thing you need to do is think, who am I leaving out? Who's getting the short end of the stick, and is it warranted here? How could this be somehow biased against this group or that group, or this outcome, something like that? And so I think algorithmic bias is here to stay. As long as you use algorithms like this, they're going to be biased. But with significant power comes significant responsibility, right? So I'm responsible for the models that I build for clients, that I teach students how to build. I'm responsible for poking those holes in it and being upfront about how this could be skewed, how this could be biased, how this might be biased, and not simply covering it by saying, oh, because I'm using machine learning and advanced analytics, and I'm able to reduce a caseworker's files to 315 Boolean phrases and, dummy variables and this, that it's absolutely perfect, that there's no bias in there. It's completely objective. It ain't, my friends. And so I love these, but we need to take them with a hefty dose of caution. And on that light note, I'm going to leave you for this Friday afternoon. Tell me in the comments what you think. Does my argument hold water? Do you think that the possibility, the probability of bias and discrimination is enough to warrant that we just don't use these at all? I'd be interested to hear. Did any of my examples not really make sense? Let me know. Are there other examples that you have come across, or maybe you personally have experienced that you'd like to share and get other people's take on? I'd love to see those. So again, I'm Dr. Julie Allig with JLA Analytics. I'll be back here again next Friday. And until then, go forth and analyze.